Hello, gente, ¿cómo estamos? Bienvenidos un jueves más a los jueves de Newtral. Veo que el chat todavía no está demasiado activo. No pasa nada, yo sé que estáis ahí esperando. Ahí estamos, primer saludo. Hello. Bueno, vamos ya directamente con la audiencia nueva del asalto a Capitolio. Este es el comité que investiga el asalto a Capitolio. Es supuestamente la última audiencia pública que van a emitir, ¿no? Y van a contar pues ciertas revelaciones acerca del papel de Trump en el asalto al Capitolio. Ya ha empezado, es porque he tenido un problema para poder iniciar el stream y por eso llegamos un poco tarde, pero de momento no hay revelaciones, está siendo solo la presentación. Esto va sin subtítulos, así que traduciré en ciertos momentos cuando vea que están diciendo algo importante, si no luego haremos pues resúmenes, ¿no? Yo, como digo, intentaré parar cuando vea que hay alguna cosa especialmente llamativa, pero vamos a escuchar a ver qué es lo que tienen que decir. Voy a ver si primero el sonido va bien.
Today's proceeding will also be grounded in the facts, but it won't look exactly like all our other hearings.
Así lo escucháis bien, ¿verdad?
We'll also take a step back and look at the evidence in a broader context, providing a summary of key facts we've uncovered. Facts relevant to former President Trump's state of mind, about his motivation and about his intent.
Parece que esa va a ser una de las claves, ¿vale? O sea, saber un poco dicen state of mind, el estado de la mente, es decir, más o menos en qué estaba pasando por la cabeza de Trump, o qué declaraciones estaba haciendo, qué comentarios hacía cuando se estaba produciendo el asalto al Capitolio. Un poco para tener más detalles acerca de las decisiones o las no decisiones que se tomaron en el contexto del asalto al Capitolio. Recordemos que Trump había estado dando un discurso en la mañana en la Elipse, ¿no? Que es una plaza cerca de la Casa Blanca, con miles de personas que se habían congregado para escucharle. Todo esto también sabiendo pues, las acusaciones que había vertido contra las instituciones democráticas de Estados Unidos, diciendo que se había producido un fraude electoral a gran escala, nunca demostrado, no se produjo. Ganó Biden. Biden era el presidente legítimo, bueno, el presidente electo legítimo de Estados Unidos. Trump siguió lanzando acusaciones en cualquier caso. Entonces, luego él volvió a la Casa Blanca. Dentro de las revelaciones que hemos conocido por parte de este comité que investiga el asalto a Capitolio, hemos sabido pues, que Trump quiso unirse a los manifestantes que se dirigían hacia el Capitolio, que luego terminó en el asalto. Su equipo de seguridad, el servicio secreto, no le dejó, entonces terminó yendo a la Casa Blanca y desde la Casa Blanca hizo un seguimiento a través de televisión de lo que estaba sucediendo en las inmediaciones del Capitolio y después con el asalto, ¿no? La entrada a las cámaras, toda esa historia que ya conocemos por las imágenes que se hicieron virales en su momento, enero de 2021 y lo que supimos después. Entonces, hoy parece que vamos a conocer más detalles acerca de esas horas dentro de la Casa Blanca, cuáles son las decisiones que toma y no toma Trump, porque su inacción es parte de la historia también, ¿no? El hecho de que no tomara parte para llamar a la Guardia Nacional, enviar más refuerzos para la policía del Capitolio, que en ese momento estaba teniendo tantos problemas para lidiar con los manifestantes que se volcaban sobre el edificio del Capitolio, pues aquí parece que sabremos un poco más acerca de qué es lo que le pasaba por la cabeza a Trump en esos instantes tan determinantes para la historia de Estados Unidos, ¿no? En una jornada ese 6 de enero de 2021 sin duda aciaga. Así que vamos a escuchar a Liz Cheney, congresista republicana, se ha desmarcado bastante del partido republicano, del establishment, un establishment que se ha radicalizado en los últimos años, sobre todo conforme Trump ha conseguido ese liderazgo dentro del Partido Republicano. Liz Cheney, que perdió sus primarias en Wyoming. En Wyoming solo hay un distrito que representa todo el estado. Liz Cheney perdió sus primarias contra una candidata, ¿no? Era candidata más trumpista. En este caso, pues Liz Cheney, al declararse en contra de Trump, pues tenía todas las de perder en un estado muy, muy republicano. Yo, de hecho, estuve en Wyoming hace nada, pero estuve en Jackson Hole, que es como el pequeñito punto azul demócrata del estado de Wyoming. Entonces, nada, vamos a escuchar qué es lo que tienen que decir. Estas son las presentaciones, normalmente no dicen nada revelador, pero bueno, en cualquier caso interesante siempre escuchar a Liz Cheney, que es una figura, en cualquier caso, conservadora o en el contexto europeo podríamos decir incluso ultraconservadora, pero que al menos ha estado a la altura del momento histórico por el que pasa Estados Unidos cuando tenemos a un expresidente de Estados Unidos que está retando a la legitimidad de las instituciones democráticas y electorales de Estados Unidos. Vamos ya con ello, me callo la puñetera boca ya de una vez. ¡Let's go!
Evidence today, I would suggest a focus on the following points.
Dice que nos centremos en unas cosas de la evidencia que se va a presentar hoy.
President Trump had a premeditated plan to declare that the election was fraudulent and stolen before Election Day, before he knew the election results. He made his stolen election claims on election night against the advice of his campaign without any evidence in hand. Then, over the next 2 months, he sought to find those who would help him invent and spread lies about the widespread fraud. Many of those who stepped forward to help, including Rudy Giuliani, knew they never had real evidence sufficient to change the election results. And on the evening of January 5th, they admitted they were still trying to find that phantom evidence. Of course, as a result of making intentionally false claims of election fraud, Mr. Giuliani's license to practice law has now been suspended.
Bueno, aquí lo que está hablando es que Trump tenía un plan previo al día de las elecciones para decir que los comicios habían sido fraudulentos, que no había perdido, que en realidad había ganado, que el Biden no era el presidente electo legítimo de Estados Unidos, pero esto ya lo sabíamos, ¿no? O sea, el plan era claro desde el principio, que era atentar contra la credibilidad del voto por correo, para que una vez el voto por correo se contara y beneficiara a los demócratas, decir que eso era mentira, que era pucherazo, ¿no? O sea, esto ya lo sabíamos. Lo que pasa es que está hablando también del papel de Rudy Giuliani y otros aliados afines a Trump, que también persiguieron esas iniciativas de declarar el fraude electoral que no se había producido y que no se demostró en ningún caso en los diferentes juicios que se celebraron en los días posteriores o las semanas posteriores a las elecciones.
But still, he made the conscious choice to claim fraudulently that the election was stolen, to pressure state officials to change election results, to manufacture fake electoral slates, to attempt to corrupt our Department of Justice, to summon tens of thousands of supporters to Washington. Knowing that they were angry, knowing that some of them were armed, he sent them to the Capitol. Then, as the riot was underway, he incited his supporters to further violence by publicly condemning his vice president. And then he refused for hours to disband his rioting supporters and instruct them to leave the Capitol.
Es decir, que en todo ese contexto de declarar las elecciones como fraudulentas y de haber llevado a cabo bastantes intentonas para revertir esos resultados a través de los juicios, a través de las acusaciones de fraude, a través de proponer electores alternativos. Luego, si queréis, explicamos la trama de los falsos electores, que no sé si algunos... yo creo que la mayoría me habéis escuchado explicarlo varias veces, pero si creéis que es necesario lo vuelvo a explicar hoy. Dejádmelo saber en el chat. Y luego, por supuesto, en el mismo asalto al Capitolio, pues bueno, pregonar de nuevo esas acusaciones de fraude electoral, incitar a la violencia para que los manifestantes que estaban presentes en Washington DC ese día se dirigieran hacia el Capitolio y luego pues denunciar el papel del vicepresidente Mike Pence, que en ese caso no podía tener ningún tipo de influencia en revertir los resultados electorales, en esa certificación que tenía que celebrarse en esa jornada del 6 de enero, pero aún así pues Donald Trump lanzó como el dardo, ¿no? Puso el objetivo sobre su vicepresidente y eso implicaba bastantes problemas, ¿no? De esa posible, ese posible agravamiento de la violencia en ese día.
When men and women of good faith make them hold, regardless of the political cost. We have no guarantee.
Por cierto, 100% la que habla tiene algo que ver con Dick Cheney, el vicepresidente con George W. Bush entre 2000 y 2008. Porque es su hija.
Learned not to install people who could stand in the way. And also, please consider this. The rulings of our courts are respected and obeyed because we as citizens pledge to accept and honor them. Most importantly, our president, who has a constitutional obligation to faithfully execute the laws, swears to accept them. What happens when the president disregards the court's rulings as illegitimate? When he disregards the rule of law? That, my fellow citizens, breaks our republic. Finally, as you view the evidence today, also consider this. President Trump knew from unassailable sources that his election fraud claims were false. He admitted he had lost the election. He took actions consistent with that belief. Claims that President Trump actually thought the election was stolen are not supported by fact and are not a defense. There is no defense that Donald Trump was duped or irrational. No president can defy the rule of law and act this way in a constitutional republic, period. Mr. Chairman, our nation's federal judges are sworn to do impartial
Grande
justice,
en Apatri. Gracias por esos 2 meses de nivel 1.
preserve our union.
Merci.
Dozens of these judges have been addressing January 6th cases, and many have given us plain, unmistakable warnings about the direction of our republic. Let me read from one judge's statement given at a recent sentencing hearing. Quote, high-ranking members of Congress and state officials who know perfectly well the claim of fraud was and is untrue, and that the election was legitimate, are so afraid of losing their power, they won't.
Esta es una realidad gigantesca. O sea, es obvio que los aliados de Trump, que durante meses han hablado de fraude electoral a gran escala, nunca demostrado, lo hacen simplemente para permanecer en el poder, porque saben que, despertando las emociones más viscerales del electorado pro-Trump, ese que se ha creído las mentiras del expresidente durante tanto tiempo, saben que alentando esas mentiras es la única forma que tienen de permanecer en el poder. Y no tanto por ganar elecciones generales, sino por ganar elecciones primarias. Porque las primarias republicanas, en las que votan votantes republicanos, es donde ves a esa base de votantes más pro-Trump y más dados a creerse esas mentiras y a pedir a sus representantes políticos que luchen contra las instituciones que defienden que Biden es el presidente legítimo, ¿no? Piden que luchen por ellos, pero porque se han creído las teorías de la conspiración sobre el fraude electoral. Entonces creen que necesitan paladines, caballeros, ¿no? Que luchen por la defensa de lo que ellos creen que es verdad, ¿no? Que es que Trump en realidad ganó las elecciones, que se produjo un pucherazo bestial por parte de los demócratas y, pues, ya está. Entonces ahí hay candidatos republicanos o políticos republicanos que quieren permanecer en el poder y que saben que si no defienden esas teorías de la conspiración, entonces alguien que sí que las defienda y que les venga desde la derecha, desde esos extremos, va a ganar esas primarias republicanas. Así que es una cuestión de permanecer en el poder sin duda, y esa jueza que en este caso se hacía eco de los aliados afines a Trump que siguen defendiendo estas teorías, o sea, es una cuestión, como digo, de poder.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Very shortly after the election, we began this meeting by returning to election night, November 3rd, 2020. As the chairman noted, we've previously presented testimony about how the election results were expected to come in that night. In certain states, ballots cast by mail before Election Day would be counted only after the polls closed that evening. That meant that election results would not be known for some time. Although President Trump's campaign manager, Bill Stepien, House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy, and Jared Kushner had advised Donald Trump to encourage mail-in voting by Republicans, President Trump did not do so.
Yeah, I just remember generally, you had people arguing that we had a very, very robust get out the vote effort, and that, mail-in ballots could be a good thing for us if we looked at it correctly.
There was one meeting that was had in particular. I invited Kevin McCarthy to join the meeting, he being of like mind on the issue with me, in which we made our case for why we believed mail-in voting not to be a bad thing for his campaign. But the president's mind was made up.
So it was expected before the election that the initial counts in some states, in other words, those votes cast on election day.
Esta es clave, porque ¿qué está pasando? Aquí las declaraciones de Jared Kushner, el yerno de Donald Trump, y de Bill Stepien, que es uno de los consejeros más importantes de Trump a nivel de campaña, es que le dijeron que, oye, el voto por correo te puede venir bien. Si la gente vota por correo, hay muchas personas en el contexto de la pandemia, recordemos que las elecciones se produjeron en el año 2020, que van a poder votar por ti en mayor número si defiendes que el voto por correo es seguro. Pero Donald Trump ya se había hecho a la idea de que no, de que él quiere atacar el voto por correo. Y si ataca voto por correo, y que es lo que vimos que terminó produciéndose, lo que ocurre es que los votantes republicanos que creen en Trump dejan de creer en el voto por correo, porque creen que es más dado al fraude. ¿Qué ocurre? Que al final tienes una disparidad tremenda, una prácticamente simetría entre los votantes demócratas, que son más dados a creerse la pandemia, que son más dados a decir, vale, prefiero votar desde casa para no arriesgarme a ir presencialmente a votar de forma presencial, pues porque me puedo contagiar, entonces voto por correo. Entonces ves que los demócratas, eso se veía en las encuestas y se vio luego el día de las elecciones, que eran más dados a votar por correo. Sin embargo, los votantes republicanos, especialmente los más pro Trump, eran más dados a votar de forma presencial. ¿Qué ocurre? Pues que el día de las elecciones, conforme se contaba el voto presencial primero, pues había más votos republicanos, había una tendencia republicana en esos votos. Conforme al final de la jornada electoral o en los días posteriores se contaba el voto por correo, ese voto era mucho más demócrata. Entonces, claro, al principio parecía que los republicanos estaban ganando de forma sobrada, pero luego conforme se contaba el voto por correo, recuperaban esa diferencia. Entonces ahí es cuando vimos que esos ataques a la legitimidad de las elecciones eran en realidad algo mucho más pensado por parte de Donald Trump.
This is an embarrassment to our country. We were getting ready to win this election. Frankly, we did win this election. We did win this election. We want all voting to stop.
We now know more about
Claro, él quería que stop the count, ¿no? Parad de contar votos, parad el escrutinio, porque yo ya he ganado con este voto presencial. Él no quería que se contara el voto por correo porque sabía perfectamente que ese voto beneficiaba a los demócratas, precisamente porque llevaba meses atentando contra el voto por correo. Y de hecho tenéis vídeos de Newtral que yo hice en su momento diciendo ¿por qué Trump está atacando el voto por correo? Por esta razón. Para poder luego decir que se ha producido fraude. Si es que era clarísimo. Lo sabíamos. Ahora pasa que vamos a tener detalles de fuentes directas para conocer qué es lo que pensaba Trump.
Victory announcement from President Trump. Here's what the Vice President's counsel, Greg Jacob, told us about his preparations with the Vice President's Chief of Staff, Mark Short.
Mark had indicated to me that there was a possibility that there would be a declaration of victory within the White House that some might push for. And this is prior to the election results being known. And that he was trying to figure out a way of avoiding the vice president sort of being thrust into a position of needing to opine on that when he might not have sufficient information to do so.
O sea, que Trump ya tenía planeado hacer una declaración de victoria en los... O sea, antes de que se supiera ningún resultado. O sea, tenía la intención de declarar victoria cuando se conocieran al menos algunos resultados. Claramente, pues cuando se contara el voto presidencial y sabría que iría ganando, ¿no? Entonces, en este caso, lo que quería el vicepresidente Mike Pence, o al menos sus consejeros principales, es nosotros no queremos meternos en este lío, porque es un lío de 3 pares de huevos.
Development of all relevant facts. A few days before the election.
Claro, entonces lo que querían hacer los consejeros de Mike Pence es, oye, tú aléjate de esto, no hagas ningún tipo de declaración que te pueda meter en un lío legal diciendo que hemos ganado las elecciones, Mike Pence como candidato a la vicepresidencia, no vamos a hacer eso porque o sea, podemos, como digo, meternos en un lío legal si declaramos algo antes de tener todos los hechos con nosotros.
Declares, we had an election today. And I won. And the Fitton memo specifically indicates a plan that only the votes counted by the election day deadline, and there is no election day deadline, would matter. Everyone knew that ballot counting would lawfully continue past election day. Claiming that the counting on election night must stop before millions of votes were counted was, as we now know, a key part.
Claro, es que ese es el tema. O sea, en un contexto en el que multitud de estados han cambiado su legislación para que la gente pueda votar por correo o pueda votar de forma temprana y de otras formas, ¿no? Por ejemplo, el drive-in voting que se habilitó en el estado de Texas, que tú podías ir con el coche a votar directamente desde el coche, como digo, de nuevo, en el contexto de la pandemia. Lo que ocurre aquí es que decían, o sea, esto ya era en un memo, ¿no? En un memorándum avisando de qué declaraciones podía hacer Trump el día de las elecciones, es decir, no, lo que vale es lo que se cuenta el día de las elecciones, y eso no no es así. O sea, hay millones de votos en multitud de estados diferentes en los que se tenía que contar, pues, hasta que se contara cada uno de los votos restantes. Entonces, si no te da tiempo a contar el día de las elecciones, ¿qué pasa? ¿Que el resto de votos no se puede contar? No es justo, ¿no? No es justo, no es legítimo, no es democrático. Esto es simplemente porque sabían que el voto presencial se iba a contar en esas primeras horas y el voto por correo en muchos estados se iba a contar a posteriori. Y no iba a dar tiempo a contarlo todo en una primera jornada. Entonces, claro, si tú te quitas el resto de días en los que da tiempo a contar, pues has ganado las elecciones. Es algo, o sea, completamente antidemocrático.
Right, he's going to declare victory. But that doesn't mean he's the winner. He's just going to say he's the winner. The Democrats, more of our people vote early that count. Theirs voted mail. And so they're going to have a natural disadvantage, and Trump's going to take advantage of it. That's our strategy. He's going to declare himself a winner. So when you wake up Wednesday morning, it's going to be a firestorm. Also, if Trump is losing by 10 or 11 o'clock at night, it's going to be even crazier. No, because he's going to sit right there and say they stole it.
Agree.
I'm directing the Attorney General to shut down all ballot places in all 50 states. It's going to be no. He's not going out easy. If Biden's winning, Trump is going to do some crazy shit.
O sea, aquí Steve Bannon, uno de los que fue consejeros de campaña en 2016 y que luego estuvo en la Casa Blanca, pero se salió, aún así seguía teniendo conversaciones con Trump, ¿no?, a lo largo de su presidencia, pero lo que dice es que dependiendo, o sea, esto es el 31 de octubre, antes del día de las elecciones, ¿no? Entonces lo que dice es, si está ganando a lo largo de la noche electoral, cuando todavía se están contando votos, lo que va a decir es, que se acabe, ¿no? El miércoles por la mañana Trump ya ha ganado, todo lo que se cuente después no vale, ¿no? O sea, que ya se sabía lo que iba a hacer. Y lo que... Bueno, un momento.
It's all converging, and now we're on, as they say, the point of attack, right? The point of attack tomorrow. I'll tell you this. It's not going to happen like you think it's going to happen, okay? It's going to be quite extraordinarily different. And all I can say is strap in. You have made this happen, and tomorrow it's game day. So strap in. Let's get ready.
Another close associate of Donald Trump apparently knew of Mr. Trump's intentions.
Sí, esto no es nuevo, ¿eh? O sea, simplemente es para tener un poco más el contexto, entiendo, de las revelaciones que van a hacer más adelante. Pero es importante tenerlo porque sabemos que la cronología es la que es, ¿no? Entonces, Bannon lo que estaba diciendo es que, o sea, antes de las elecciones dice, en el caso de que Biden esté ganando de forma sobrada la misma noche de las elecciones, incluso contándose primero el voto presencial, está ganando Biden, que habla pues un poco de una victoria abrumadora que habría conseguido el candidato demócrata. Está diciendo que Trump aún así habría salido a la palestra y habría dicho, no, nos han robado las elecciones. Voy a dirigir a mi fiscal general para que cierre todos los lugares de voto, los colegios electorales, porque esto no es así. Entonces, esto por suerte no se produjo porque habría sido una crisis constitucional. Tampoco creo que el fiscal general habría estado de acuerdo con ello. Se habrían producido unas dimisiones generalizadas dentro de la administración de Trump, pero bueno, en cualquier caso.
I really do suspect it'll still be up in the air. But when that happens, the key thing to do is to claim victory. Possession is 9/10 of the law. No, we won. Fuck you. Sorry.
Esto se filtró hace un par de semanas, me parece.
Fuck the Lord and let's get right to the violence. That's what I'm It's no point. Start smashing pumpkins if you know what I mean.
Este es Roger Stone, que también muy cercano a Donald Trump durante los últimos años, que estos son imágenes de un documental que estaban grabando unos documentalistas, valga la redundancia, perdonad, pero con Roger Stone, de los prolegómenos de la campaña, de las elecciones y demás historias. Entonces, Roger Stone ya adelantaba un poco también los acontecimientos. Dice, cuando haya dudas de qué está pasando el día de las noches de las elecciones, cuando se estén contando votos, el truco está en declarar victoria, y ya está. Y en el momento que se declare victoria pero haya dudas, vamos directamente a la violencia, que lo está diciendo un poco en broma, un poco en serio, ¿no? Y es no solo la idea esta de declarar victoria, sino aparte es una estrategia política antidemocrática, por cierto, spoiler, pero lo que dice es, la posesión es una 9 de 10 partes de las... ¿cómo se dice? De una selección, bueno, en este caso de la ley, pero bueno, en este caso de las elecciones, ¿no?
He wrote, I also told the president exactly how he can appoint a special counsel with full subpoena power to ensure those who are attempting to steal the 2020 election through voter fraud are charged, convicted, and to ensure Donald Trump continues as our president. As we know by now, the idea for a special counsel was not just an idle suggestion. It was something President Trump had actually tried to do earlier that month. We know that Roger Stone was at the Willard Hotel on January 5th and 6th, and we know from other witness testimony that President Trump asked his Chief of Staff, Mark Meadows, to speak with Roger Stone and General Michael Flynn that night. In addition to his connection to President Trump, Roger Stone maintained extensive direct connections to two groups responsible for violently attacking the Capitol, the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys. Individuals from both of these organizations have been charged with the crime of seditious conspiracy. Now, what is seditious conspiracy? It is a conspiracy to use violent force against the United States, to oppose the lawful authority of the United States. Multiple associates of Roger Stone from both the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys have been charged with this crime. Close associates of Roger Stone, including Joshua James, have pled guilty to this crime. We know that at least 7 Oath Keepers who have been criminally charged provided personal security for Roger Stone or were seen with him on January 6th or in the weeks leading up to January 6th. For example, Joshua James, the leader of the Alabama Oath Keepers, provided security for Roger Stone and was with him on January 5th.
Bueno, aquí están intentando establecer un vínculo entre Roger Stone, o sea, entre Trump, Roger Stone, que ya sabemos que son amigos, que ha sido consejero, ¿no? Y una voz cercana a Trump durante todos estos años, pero luego es vínculo Trump-Roger Stone y luego Roger Stone y Oath Keepers y otros grupos extremistas, ¿no? Oath Keepers, que es uno de estos grupos de extrema derecha bastante peligrosos, que están ahora metidos sus principales líderes en un juicio del que os hablaré la semana que viene en Newtral, por cierto.
Provided security for Roger Stone, and both are charged with leading a military-style stack attack of Oath Keepers, attacking the Capitol on January 6th. Perhaps even more disturbing is Roger Stone's close association with Enrique Tarrio, the national chairman of the Proud Boys. Roger Stone's connection with Enrique Tarrio and the Proud Boys is well documented by video evidence with phone records the Select Committee has obtained. Tarrio, along with other Proud Boys, has been charged with multiple crimes concerning the attack on January 6th, including seditious conspiracy. During the attack, Tarrio sent a message to other Proud Boys claiming, "We did that."
Proud Boys es otro grupo de estos extremistas, ¿eh?
He also visited the White House on December 12th. Later that day, he posted a disturbing video claiming credit for the attack. This video, posted on January 6th, was apparently created prior to the attack. This big lie, President Trump's effort to convince Americans that he had won the 2020 election, began before the election results even came in. It was intentional, it was premeditated, it was not based on election results or any evidence of actual fraud affecting the results or any actual problems with voting machines. It was a plan concocted in advance to convince his supporters that he won. And the people who seemingly knew about that plan in advance would ultimately play a significant role in the events of January 6th. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Bueno, tampoco ha sido muy interesante, pero vamos a ver qué información más tiene sobre los Oath Keepers y los Proud Boys, que son grupos extremistas que estuvieron con un papel importante en el asalto a Capitolio y quizá establecen un nuevo vínculo con Trump. Este es Adam Kinzinger, que es un congresista republicano que se va a retirar, o sea, el año que viene ya no estará en el Congreso, y que ha sido una de las voces más anti-Trump de los últimos 2 años, ¿no? Básicamente, dentro del Partido Republicano. Vamos a ver qué dice. Él igual tiene información sobre estos grupos extremistas más concreta.
Told the president that he had lost and that there wasn't a chance of him winning.
Olmillos, ¿cómo estás?
I know that the president, when the networks called it, of course, he was informed about the network decision. That afternoon, at some point, myself and a handful of other folks went over and sat down with the president and communicated that the odds of us prevailing in legal challenges were very small.
You know, after the election, as of November 7th, in your judgment, what were the chances of President Trump winning the election?
After that point?
Yes.
None.
At times, President Trump acknowledged the reality of his loss. Although he publicly claimed that he had won the election, privately he admitted that Joe Biden would take over as
Sí,
president.
Lofren sí que es demócrata, de California creo, la otra que hablaba antes.
So we're in the Oval and there's a discussion going on. And the president says, I think it could have been Pompeo, but he says words to the effect of, yeah, we lost, we need to let that issue go to the next guy, meaning President Biden.
I remember maybe a week after the election was called, I popped into the Oval just to give the president the headlines and see how he was doing. And he was looking at the TV and he said, "Can you believe I lost to this effing guy?"
Mark raised it with me on the 18th.
¡Hoy casi di hola! ¿Cuánto tiempo?
Following that conversation where the motorcade ride driving back to the White House, and I had said, does the president really think that he lost? And he said, a lot of times he'll tell me that he lost, but he wants to keep fighting it. And he thinks that there might be enough to overturn the election, but he pretty much has acknowledged that he's lost.
O sea, aquí están intentando demostrar a través de declaraciones de gente cercana de la Casa Blanca que Trump en realidad sabía que había perdido, ¿no? Pero que aún así estaba intentando buscar resquicios fuera de los marcos legales para poder revertir los resultados de las elecciones.
Issued an order for large-scale U.S. troop withdrawals. He disregarded concerns about the consequences for fragile governments on the front lines of the fight against ISIS and al-Qaeda terrorists. Knowing he was leaving office, he acted immediately and signed this order on November 11th, which would have required the immediate withdrawal of troops from Somalia and Afghanistan, all to be complete before the Biden inauguration on January 20th. As you watch these clips, recall that General Keith Kellogg was the National Security Advisor to the Vice President and had served as Chief of Staff to the National Security Council for President Trump. And General Milley was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff at the Pentagon.
Are you familiar with a memo that the president reportedly signed on November 11th, 2020, ordering that troops be withdrawn from Afghanistan and Somalia?
Yes.
So I think you might have seen some things where there's a memo or something from Johnny McEntee to Douglas McGregor. It says, here's your task to get U.S. forces out of Somalia, get U.S. forces out of Afghanistan.
When you first interviewed and met Colonel Douglas McGregor, is it fair to say you discussed this decision of withdrawing from Somalia and Afghanistan, correct?
Yeah, I'm sure that was part of it, yeah.
And that was the position that he was taking over there was senior advisor to the Secretary of Defense, is that correct?
Yes.
So on that same day, just so I'm clear, he responded back to you that they, meaning DOD leadership, was not going to take any of those steps without an order.
Without a directive, yeah.
I explained in language that should be in the order while I was in the meeting with McEntee. And this was my answer to him. I said, if you want this to happen, or the president wants this to happen, he's got to write an order.
So you never wrote this down in any capacity?
Well, I sketched on a piece of paper for him some key statements. The president directs. This is, what's the right word? Boilerplate language.
Who within his office drafted the order?
It was myself and one of my assistants.
McEntee duly types it up, brings it in to the president. President signs it, and boom, it's over, faxed over, or emailed, scanned over to Capitolio, delivers it to me.
Was it by auto pen, or was it the president himself signing it?
It was the president.
Estoy intentando enterarme muy bien de todo para contároslo bien, ¿eh?
I did.
It is odd. It is non-standard. It is potentially dangerous. I personally thought it was militarily not feasible nor wise.
And I proceeded to tell the PPO and proceeded to tell McGregor that if I ever saw anything like that, I would do something physical. Because I thought what that was done was a tremendous disservice to the nation. And by the way, that was a very, very contested issue. There were people who did not agree with getting out of Afghanistan. I appreciate their concerns. An immediate departure that memo said would have been catastrophic. It's the same thing what President Biden went through. It would have been a debacle.
Keep in mind, the order was for an immediate withdrawal. It would have been catastrophic. And yet, President Trump signed the order. These are the highly consequential actions of a president who knows his term will shortly end. At the same time that President Trump was acknowledging privately that he had lost the election, he was hearing that there was no evidence of fraud or irregularities sufficient to change the outcome.
I remember
Ahora os lo explico, ¿eh?
a call with Mr. Meadows, where Mr. Meadows was asking me what I was finding and if I was finding anything.
Vale, ahora están hablando de otra cosa. Lo que está intentando demostrar Kinzinger, que Kinzinger es un ex veterano de guerra, o sea, un veterano de guerra, entonces, ¿sabes? Estos temas como que le tocan un poco más de cerca. Y lo que está contando, está hablando de la retirada de tropas de Somalia y de Afganistán, porque esto entra un poco en lo que estaban intentando demostrar de que Trump sabe que había perdido, ¿no? Por esas declaraciones antes de varios consejeros cercanos de la Casa Blanca que decían que Trump hacía declaraciones y comentarios admitiendo que había perdido las elecciones, pese a que luego en público estaba luchando para revertir los resultados, diciendo que se había producido un fraude electoral a gran escala. Como digo, nunca ha demostrado, pero que en privado aceptaba que había perdido. Entonces, la decisión de firmar una orden que al final nunca se terminó de producir, de retirar las tropas de Afganistán y de Somalia de forma inmediata, pese a que sus principales consejeros de Seguridad Nacional y del Departamento de Defensa le recomendaban que no lo hiciera porque podía desencadenarse una debacle, tal y como se produjo después con la retirada de tropas de Afganistán anunciada y llevada a cabo por Biden en el mes de agosto de 2021, lo que decían es, no lo hagas, se va a liar parda, y sin embargo Trump aún así quería llevarla a cabo. ¿Por qué esto tiene como consonancia con el hecho de que Trump sabía que había perdido las elecciones? Pues porque sabía que el que se iba a comer el marrón era Joe Biden, que iba a ser inaugurado presidente unos pocos días después, el 21 de enero, me parece que es, de 2021. Esto ocurre, repito, en los últimos días de la presidencia de Trump. Entonces, es una decisión completamente irresponsable, que sabe que el marrón no se lo va a comer él, sino el siguiente, porque sabe que ha perdido, ¿vale? O sea, no es una decisión que tome como presidente y teniendo en cuenta que va a asumir él las consecuencias. Está tomando esa decisión, está firmando esa orden ejecutiva de la retirada inmediata de tropas de Somalia y de Afganistán porque sabe que el marrón se lo va a comer el siguiente, el que ha ganado las elecciones de forma legítima, porque él sabe que ha perdido. Entonces, por eso están presentando estos hechos.
In our past hearings, we told you that the committee had identified a total of 62 election lawsuits filed by the Trump campaign and its allies between November 4th and January 6th of 2021. Those cases resulted in 61 losses and only a single victory, which did not affect the outcome for any candidate.
Esto ya os lo expliqué yo.
Que
en realidad los juicios que se presentaron en todo lo que tiene que ver con el fraude electoral, había 60 y pico juicios, ninguno terminó en victoria para la administración de Trump o para la campaña de Trump. La única victoria fue una cosa de Pensilvania sobre voto por correo que se contó más tarde, ¿no? O que llegó voto por correo que llegó más tarde de lo que debería y que estaban viendo si se contaba o no se contaba como parte del voto final, pero es un voto que nunca fue parte del escrutinio, que nunca se sumó al recuento que veíamos todos desde casa y que descartar esos votos no tenía ningún tipo de relevancia sobre el resultado final en el estado de Pensilvania.
We have neither here. A federal judge in Wisconsin wrote, quote, "The court has allowed the former president the chance to make his case and he has lost on the merits."
Bueno, aquí es un poco algunos de esos juicios, ¿no?, que terminaron en nada.
Called the claims, quote, "nothing but speculation and conjecture that votes for President Trump were either destroyed, discarded, or switched to votes for Vice President Biden." A federal judge in Michigan sanctioned 9 attorneys, including Sidney Powell, for making frivolous allegations in an election fraud case, describing the case as a historic and profound abuse of the judicial process. Recently, a group of distinguished Republican election lawyers, former judges, and elected officials issued a report confirming the findings of the courts. In their report entitled Lost, Not Stolen, these prominent Republicans analyzed each election challenge and concluded this: Donald Trump and his supporters failed to present evidence of fraud or inaccurate results significant enough to invalidate the results of the 2020 presidential election.
Un poco más de lo mismo, ¿eh?
On December 11th, Trump's allies lost a lawsuit in the U.S. Supreme Court that he regarded as his last chance at success in the courts. A newly obtained Secret Service message from that day shows how angry President Trump was about the outcome. Quote, "Just FYI, POTUS is pissed. Breaking news, Supreme Court denied his lawsuit. He is livid now." Cassidy Hutchison, an aide to Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, was present for that conversation and described it in this way.
This is the day that the Supreme Court had rejected that case. Mr. Meadows and I were in the White House residence at a Christmas reception. And as we were walking back from the Christmas reception that evening, the president was walking out of the Oval Office, so we crossed paths in the Rose Garden colonnade. The president was fired up about the Supreme Court decision. And so I was standing next to Mr. Meadows, but I stepped back, so I was probably 2-3 feet catty corner from him, diagonal from him. The president's just raging about the decision and how it's wrong and why didn't we make more calls, and just his typical anger outburst at this decision. And the president said, he had said something to the effect of, "I don't want people to know we lost, Mark. This is embarrassing. Figure it out. We need to figure it out. I don't want people to know that we lost."
Our country is a country of laws, where every person, including the president,
O sea, el Tribunal Supremo decide no tomar, ¿sabes? No escuchar casos sobre el fraude electoral, supuesto fraude electoral, nunca ha demostrado que no se produjo. Entonces, Trump estaba súper cabreado y Cassidy Hutchinson, que era consejera del entonces jefe de gabinete de Trump, Mark Meadows, vio como Trump se enfadó que pillas y dijo, no puede ser que la gente sepa que hemos perdido, es vergonzoso, ¿no? Le cuesta mucho admitir derrotas a Donald Trump, de hecho no lo ha admitido nunca, pero el factor interesante de este asunto es que es verdad que no vemos nunca a Trump enfadado, pero por lo visto se cabrea que pillas. Y esto, todos los que han trabajado con Trump, que han hecho declaraciones acerca de sus cabreos en la Casa Blanca, hablan de un Trump, o sea, que suelta una cantidad de tacos y que se enfurece que pillas.
The president is obligated to abide by the rulings of the courts.
Of course.
And I assume you also would...
Everybody is obligated to abide by rules, of course.
And I assume you also would agree the president has a particular obligation to take care that the laws be faithfully executed.
That is one of the president's obligations, correct.
Ivanka, do you believe the president's obligated to abide by the rulings of the courts?
Lol.
I do.
By mid-December of 2020, President Trump's senior staff were attempting to persuade him to concede the election outcome.
But if your question is, did I believe he should concede the election at a point in time, yes, I did.
December 14th was the day that the states certified their votes and sent them to Congress. And in my view, that was the end of the matter. I didn't see... I thought that this would lead inexorably to a new administration.
I told him that my personal viewpoint was that the Electoral College had met, which is the system that our country is set under to elect a president and vice president. And I believed at that point that the means for him to pursue litigation was probably closed.
And you recall what his response, if any, was?
He disagreed.
Secretary of Labor Gene Scalia, the son of late Justice Scalia, visited President Trump in mid-December and explained the situation clearly.
And so I had to put a call into the president. I might have called on the 13th. We spoke, I believe, on the 14th, in which I conveyed to him that I thought that it was time for him to acknowledge that President Biden had prevailed in the election. But I communicated to the president that when that legal process is exhausted and when the electors have voted, that's the point at which that outcome needs to be expected. I told him that I did believe, yes, that once those legal processes were run, if fraud had not been established that had affected the outcome of the election, then unfortunately I believed that what had to be done was concede the outcome.
Not only did the courts reject President Trump's fraud and other allegations, his Department of Justice appointees, including Bill Barr, Jeffrey Rosen, and Richard Donahue, did as well. President Trump knew the truth. He heard what all his experts and senior staff were telling him.
Bueno, un poco lo mismo. Misma historia de que creo que ya han demostrado en otros momentos. Tampoco sé. O sea, no sé si es porque están intentando llegar a una conclusión blockbuster, ¿sabes? Como que quieren volver a presentar todos los hechos, o sea, que Trump sabía perfectamente que había perdido, que Trump llevaba preparando, o sea, estaba haciendo el campo de cultivo para que poder decir que había ganado las elecciones cuando en realidad no, atacando el voto por correo y demás historias. No sé si están preparando todo eso para hacer una declaración, o sea, como una revelación final más importante, pero bueno, de momento no.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mid-December was a turning point. President Trump made a decision, a choice, to ignore the courts and his advisors and to push forward to overturn the election. His efforts to overturn the election were not random or disconnected. Rather, they were part of a coordinated, multi-part plan to ensure that he stayed in power. Donald Trump was the driver behind each part of this plan. He was personally and directly involved. Of course, a key element of the plan was continuing to convince tens of millions of Americans that he did not, in fact, lose. Again, he did this even though his own campaign advisors and his Justice Department officials told him his claims of fraud were wrong. In this video, you'll see that even when top law enforcement officials told the president his election fraud claims were false, he still repeated the claims in the days and weeks that followed. Sometimes, even the very next day.
I specifically raised the Dominion voting machines, which I found to be among the most disturbing allegations. Disturbing in the sense that I saw absolutely zero basis for the allegations. I told them that it was crazy stuff, and they were wasting their time on that, and it was doing a grave disservice to the country.
Eso es lo de las...
We have a company that's very suspect. Its name is Dominion. With the turn of a dial or the change of a chip, you can press a button for Trump and the vote goes to Biden. What kind of a system is this?
We definitely talked about Antrim County again. That was sort of done at that point because the...
O sea, están intentando establecer un vínculo entre consejeros de Trump que le decían que esto es una locura, que esto es mentira, que esto son teorías de la conspiración concretas, ¿no? Está hablando, pues, de, por ejemplo, el tema de los sistemas de voto Dominion, que es una compañía que hacía máquinas de voto electrónico en algunos estados, no en todos. Luego en condados donde se habían visto vídeos o referencias, anécdotas, declaraciones de testigos que decían que se había producido fraude electoral, y él, pues, pese a que sus consejeros le decían que eso no era verdad, o sus consejeros o miembros del Departamento de Justicia como Bill Barr, ¿no?, que era el fiscal general en aquel entonces, pese a que decían que no, Trump luego salía en público y decía, no, sí, ha pasado esto.
In our country.
I went into this and would, tell them how crazy some of these allegations were and how ridiculous some of them were. And I'm talking about some of the ones like, more absentee votes were cast in Pennsylvania than there were absentee ballots requests. Stuff like that. It was just easy to blow up. There was never an indication of interest in what the actual facts were.
Sí, 100% Trump puede ganar otra vez. Si es que esto no tiene ningún tipo de influencia.
than there were voters.
No lo ha tenido hasta ahora, porque lo va a tener, o sea, salvo que haya una revelación muy bestia.
That's an easy one to figure. And by the thousands.
Then he raised the big vote dump, as he called it, in Detroit. And that, you know, he said people saw boxes coming into the counting station at all hours of the morning. And I said, Mr. President, there are 630 precincts in Detroit, and unlike elsewhere in the state, they centralized the counting process, so they're not counted in each precinct. They're moved to counting stations, and so the normal process would involve boxes coming in at all different hours.
Efectivamente, ¿no?
This is Michigan. At 6:31 in the morning, a vote dump of 149,772 votes.
O sea, tenemos que tener en cuenta que en los días previos su puto fiscal general le dice no puede haber un pucherazo en Detroit, en Michigan, a las 4 de la mañana, porque es que eso es el proceso normal y corriente del recuento de votos, porque hay un huevo de colegios electorales en Detroit y en Michigan en general, y en ese caso se centraliza el recuento de los votos, y es algo que ya sabíamos, es un escrutinio centralizado que ya conocíamos que iba a ocurrir y que se iba a dar de esa manera. Y evidentemente, si tienes colegios electorales por todo el estado, o en este caso por toda la ciudad de Detroit, y hay momentos en los que se recopila todo el voto por correo que se está contando, que se envía a ese lugar centralizado, pues llegarán a altas horas de la noche y llegarán esos votos. Y ya está, eso no significa que sea un recuento fraudulento. Se lo habían explicado, aún así sale en la Casa Blanca como puto presidente de Estados Unidos y dice, pone estos gráficos que son mentira. Y que él sabe que son mentira porque se lo han dicho sus principales consejeros, por mucho que luego haya aliados afines que le estén diciendo que es verdad. Esto es como lo mismo de Alex Jones, que al final llega un punto que es que, por mucho que tú te creas, que te puedas creer que es verdad, porque yo creo que Trump es bastante más listo que eso, ¿no? Por mucho, y además que a sus principales aliados les admitía que, sí, bueno, hemos perdido, whatever, pero llega un punto en el que es una irresponsabilidad, no es propio de un presidente de Estados Unidos, un cargo de ese calibre no puede estar dispuesto a creerse todas estas cosas y sobre todo a pregonarlas en público, a un público pues dado a creerse todo lo que le cuente una figura como la suya, ¿no? Que es un presidente, es el líder del Partido Republicano de facto, en fin.
Made it clear what his intentions were to prevent the orderly transfer of power. We all recall, for example, President Trump's tape-recorded call with Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger. At the time this call occurred, President Trump had already been told repeatedly by the U.S. Justice Department, by his campaign, and by his advisors that his allegations of fraud in Georgia were false.
So, look, all I want to do is this. I just want to find 11,780 votes, which is one more than we have, because we won the state. Look, we need only 11,000 votes. We have far more than that as it stands now. We'll have more and more. So what are we going to do here, folks? I only need 11,000 votes. Fellas, I need 11,000 votes. Give me a break.
O sea, está diciendo que necesita 11.000 votos, que es la diferencia que hay entre Biden y Trump. Biden ganando en el estado de Georgia y llama al secretario de Estado, que es la figura, el cargo ejecutivo que se encarga de supervisar las elecciones, y le dice, tío, que solo necesito que me encuentres 11.000 votos. O sea, esto en el contexto de decir, a ver, en realidad hemos ganado estas elecciones, han hecho pucherazo, pero necesito que me encuentres 11.000 votos. No se sabe si se refiere a 11.000 votos para nosotros o 11.000 votos que sean ilegales de los otros para arrestarlos y que nosotros ganemos estas elecciones. O sea, es una cosa muy loca. De todas maneras, alguien me ha preguntado, dice, ¿pero crees que tiene posibilidades reales, Emilio, de ganar Trump la presidencia otra vez? 100%. O sea, tú ves las encuestas y es cierto que hay mucha gente que no quiere que Trump se vuelva a presentar, es cierto que hay o sea, que su popularidad está por los suelos, ¿no? Un poco arrastrado de su ratio de popularidad que tenía cuando salió de la presidencia, aunque creo recordar que ha mejorado desde entonces. ¿Es peor que la popularidad de Biden? Sí, pero aún así, quiero decir, se quedó muy cerca de ganar las elecciones en 2020, pese a que Biden era una figura más popular, tenía un ratio de favorabilidad más bueno que el suyo. Entonces, si estamos en un momento económico delicado en 2024, si Trump no ha perdido demasiados enteros a nivel de popularidad y Biden sigue siendo la figura impopular que es en estos momentos, pues yo creo que perfectamente puede ganar. Al fin y al cabo, los votantes republicanos, es verdad que hay muchos que detestan a Trump o que no lo ven como una figura positiva para el futuro de la democracia de Estados Unidos, pero lo prefieren a un demócrata. Entonces van a votar por él, simplemente.
Investigation in Fulton County, Georgia. And Georgia's not the only state where President Trump
No, pero
tried
Kanye
to
West no va a
pressure
conseguir
state
votos.
officials to change
Todo el mundo sabe
the
que no.
results. He also attempted to pressure
candidato
state
mierda.
officials in Arizona, Pennsylvania, and Michigan to change the results in those states as well. While President Trump was pressuring state officials, he was also trying to use the Department of Justice to change the election result. His top officials told him that there was no evidence to support his claims of fraud, but he didn't care. As he told them, just say the election was corrupt and leave the rest to me and the Republican congressmen. When these officials would not do what he said, President Trump embarked in an effort to install Jeff Clark as
Ay, me
acting
duele la
attorney
cabeza un
general,
montón, gente.
solely because he would do what others in the department would not do. We know that Trump was doing so for a specific purpose, so Clark could corruptly employ the Justice Department's authority to help persuade the states to flip
Grande
electoral
FDFR,
votes.
gracias por esos 20 meses
For
de Prime.
example, when Richard Donahue and Jeff Rosen, both appointed by President Trump, learned of Mr. Clark's proposal, here's why they said they forcefully rejected it.
And I recall toward the end saying, what you're proposing is nothing less than the United States Justice Department meddling in the outcome of a presidential election.
But more importantly, this was not based on fact. This was actually contrary to the facts as developed by Department investigations over the...
Me está preguntando Dark en el chat, dice, ahora que ha salido el tema de las elecciones de 2024 y teniendo en cuenta que Biden no tiene tirón para las elecciones, ¿crees que hay alguien alternativo que podría presentarse en su lugar? 100%, hemos hablado bastante de él, que es Ron DeSantis, el gobernador republicano de Florida. Hay otros candidatos, muchos, la verdad. Tienes a Nikki Haley, la exgobernadora de Carolina del Sur, por ejemplo. Kristi Noem, la actual gobernadora de Dakota del Sur. Tienes a Tim Scott, el senador por South Carolina. Tienes a Tony Evers, el gobernador de Wisconsin. Hay como... No, de Wisconsin no, perdón, de Ohio. No, Tony Evers es el gobernador de Wisconsin demócrata. Yo me refiero al de Ohio. ¿Cómo se llama el gobernador de Ohio? Que se me ha ido el nombre ahora. Joder, es que me duele mucho la cabeza. Pero vamos, que sí que hay varios candidatos. Lo que pasa es que Ron DeSantis es ahora mismo la figura más popular como alternativa a Donald Trump. Lo que pasa es que sí, Martín Morala tiene razón. O sea, ¿ganarían en primarias a Trump? Por ahora lo que dicen las encuestas es que no. Yo diría que, dado el momento, Ron DeSantis tendría bastantes posibilidades de ganar a Trump en unas primarias directas, ¿no? La clave es que sea solo él contra Trump y que gran parte del establishment republicano se vaya en torno a su figura. Pero bueno, Ron DeSantis es un tío bastante listo y también bastante peligroso, la verdad. No me da tanto miedo como Trump, porque Trump es más imprevisible y más, creo que tiene unas tendencias autócratas bastante más peligrosas, pero en cualquier caso no quitemos peso a que DeSantis es bastante hijo puta. Por cierto, el Barto85, muchísimas gracias por esa suscripción de Prime. Bienvenido a la comunidad Maricopa. Si alguien más se suscribe, empezamos Tren del Hype y la lío. Os juro que la lío como hagamos un Tren del Hype, ¿eh?
Only with the president's
2 minutos y medio
but
tenéis.
also with his direct participation. Ronna McDaniel, chair of the Republican National Committee, testified before this committee that President Trump and his attorney, Dr. John Eastman, called her and asked her to arrange for the fake electors to meet and rehearse the
No te pares. No sabía que se iba a parar. Cago en la mano.
process of casting their...
Un momento, que me voy a quitar el...
When I received the call, again, I don't remember the exact date. It was from the White House switchboard, and it was President Trump who had contacted me.
And did President Trump have anyone else on the line with him?
He introduced me to a gentleman named John Eastman. So I vaguely remember him mentioning that he was a professor, and then essentially he turned the call over to Mr. Eastman, who then proceeded to talk about the importance of the RNC helping the campaign gather.
On the morning of the 6th, the Secret Service was at the Ellipse, screening the members of the crowd as they entered the rally site. And they noticed something significant about the crowd. Tens of thousands of people were outside the rally site, but did not want to go through the magnetometers, the metal detectors that were used to screen for dangerous weapons. Since our last hearings, the Select Committee has received greater cooperation from the Secret Service. Nevertheless, Secret Service text messages from this period were erased in the days and months following the attack on the Capitol, even though documents and materials related to January 6th had already been requested by the Department of Justice and Congress. But we were able to obtain nearly 1 million emails, recordings, and other electronic records from the Secret Service. Over the month of August, the Select Committee began its review of hundreds of thousands of pages and multiple hours of that material, providing substantial new evidence about what happened on January 6th and the days leading up to it. That review continues. What you're about to hear is just a sample of the new and relevant evidence that we have received. Mounting evidence before January 6th predicted violence, and not just violence generally, but violence directed at the Capitol. Intelligence about this risk was directly available to the U.S. Secret Service and others in the White House in advance of the ellipse speech, in advance of the march to the Capitol. The committee has shown evidence that President Trump was aware of the risk of violence. The FBI, U.S. Capitol Police, Metropolitan Police, and other agencies all gathered and disseminated intelligence suggesting the...
22 meses aquí ya. Madre mía, yo estuve la noche del Capitolio siguiéndolo por este canal mientras por Madrid nevaba de forma más bestia que recuerde.
Grande, es verdad.
The president's senior advisors at the
¿Cómo se llamaba la
Department of
tormenta?
Justice and FBI, for example, received an intelligence summary that included material indicating that certain people traveling to Washington were making plans to attack the Capitol.
Vale, o sea, os pongo un poco en contexto para entender todo lo que va a pasar ahora. Lo que está 30 segundos, para el tren del hype. A ver si cae uno más. Bueno, el caso que el servicio secreto tenía información directa acerca del comportamiento de Trump el día del asalto al Capitolio, el 6 de enero, porque recordemos que primero tuvo ese speech, ese discurso en la elipse, en ese jardín que hay cerca de la Casa Blanca, ¿no? Ahí en todo el meollo, cerca del Capitolio también. Entonces, lo que pasó es que después Trump se quiso acercar al Capitolio, quiso marchar con los manifestantes, no le dejó su servicio secreto, entonces había mucha expectación por saber cuáles habían sido las acciones o las decisiones que había tomado Trump en esa horquilla de tiempo. Por ejemplo, sabíamos, por referencias de Cassidy Hutchinson, esta como asistenta del entonces jefe de gabinete de la Casa Blanca, Mark Meadows, sabíamos a través de ella que por lo visto había referencias de que Trump, estando en el coche con el servicio secreto, intentó coger el volante y cogió del cuello supuestamente a un agente del servicio secreto porque quería dirigirse hacia el Capitolio con los manifestantes, ¿no? No le dejaron. Entonces, claro, no teníamos declaraciones directas de los agentes del servicio secreto para confirmar de primera mano si eso se había producido o no. Entonces, lo que quería hacer el comité era acceder a los mensajes de texto de los móviles, ¿no?, de los agentes del servicio secreto en esa horquilla de tiempo o en esos días. ¿Qué pasa? Que en los días y meses posteriores al asalto al Capitolio, los agentes del servicio secreto borraron todos los mensajes de sus móviles. Entonces, no se sabe exactamente por qué se produjo ese borrado. Hay referencias de que por lo visto fue por una actualización de los móviles o no sé qué, pero es un poco chungo, ¿no? Había agentes de servicio secreto que se ofrecieron a testificar diciendo que ese percance entre Trump y los agentes de servicio secreto nunca se produjo, pero no ha habido declaraciones que hayamos visto negándolo, ¿no? Entonces ahora lo que está enseñando es emails, correspondencia electrónica dentro del contexto del servicio secreto para saber qué es lo que se sabía acerca de la violencia que se iba a producir en el asalto al Capitolio, porque recordemos, había avisos de informes de inteligencia acerca de grupos o individuos que estaban preparando dirigir violencia contra el Capitolio, o sea, específicamente contra el Capitolio. No estamos hablando de violencia en general para protestar, manifestarse en contra del resultado de las elecciones en esa jornada del 6 de enero, que es cuando se producía la certificación de los resultados electorales, sino que concretamente violencia dirigida hacia el Capitolio, hacia los congresistas, a los senadores, incluso el vicepresidente Mike Pence, que como sabemos se negaba y se negó a revertir los resultados de las elecciones en esa certificación oficial de los resultados electorales. Entonces, ¿qué ocurre? Pues ahora están enseñando estos emails en los que se ve que hay como referencias muy distintas dentro de los informes de inteligencia acerca de ese intento de asaltar el Capitolio o dirigir violencia contra el Capitolio. Así que ahora vamos a conocer más detalles, ya lo pongo, tenéis todo el contexto. Si sabéis inglés, pues os enteráis mejor, y si no, luego yo os hago resumen, no os preocupéis. ¡Arriba España!
Bring a sniper rifle to a rally on January 6th. The user also posted a picture of a handgun and rifle with the caption, Sunday Gun Day, providing Overwatch January 6th
LOL,
will
Sunday
be
Gun
wild.
Day.
Later, on the evening of January 5th, the Secret Service learned during an FBI briefing that right-wing groups were establishing armed QRFs, or quick reaction forces, readying to deploy for January 6th. Groups like the Oath Keepers were standing by at the ready should POTUS request assistance.
LOL, standing by, eso es lo que dijo Trump en un debate.
Agents were informed.
Dijo, stand down and stand by, ¿no?
The Oath Keepers did play a specific role on January 6th and had stashed weapons in Virginia for further violence that evening. Also on that day, the Secret Service was readying its security precautions for the president's speech at the Ellipse the next day. A Secret Service deputy chief instructed agents to add certain objects to the list of items that would be prohibited at the rally site, including ballistic vests, tactical vests, armored or not, and ballistic helmets. By the morning of January 6th, it was clear
planeo estar hasta que termine. Creo que supuestamente va a durar 2 horas y media. Yo en 15 minutos voy a ir a recoger mi comida, que tengo que ir a recogerla, que hoy no me daba tiempo a hacer la comida, cocinar, pero eso, tendré que salir 5 minutos, pero lo dejaré enchufado.
By 9:09 that morning, the Secret Service could also see that many rally-goers were assembled outside the security perimeter. One agent emailed, possibly because they have stuff that couldn't come through, would probably be an issue with this crowd. Just a thought. By 9:30 that morning, agents reported more than 25,000 people outside the rally site. An hour later, the Secret Service reported that the crowd was on the mall watching, but not in line. The head of the President's Secret Service Protective Detail, Robert Engel, was specifically aware of the large crowds outside the magnetometers. He passed that information along to Tony Ornato, who worked for Mark Meadows in the Chief of Staff's office. The documents we obtained from the Secret Service make clear that the crowd outside the magnetometers was armed and the agents knew it. Take a look at what they were seeing and hearing on the ground. One report from the rally site at 7:58 a.m. said, some members of the crowd are wearing ballistic helmets, body armor, carrying radio equipment, and military-grade backpacks. Another, from 9:30 a.m., said that there were possibly OC spray, meaning pepper spray, and or plastic riot shields. At 11:23 a.m., agents also reported possible armed individuals, one with a Glock, one with a rifle. Over the next hour, agents reported possible man with a gun reported, confirmed pistol on hip located in a tree, and one detained at 14th and I Street Northwest. Individual had an assault rifle on his person. Minutes before President Trump began his speech, members of the Federal Protective Service, an agency tasked with protecting federal buildings, were alerted about an arrest of a protester with a gun on his waistband. And during the speech, the weapons-related arrests continued. At 12:13 p.m., United States Park Police arrested a man with a rifle in front of the World War II Memorial.
Aquí están hablando de, aparte de las referencias de los prolegómenos al asalto al Capitolio, de que había intenciones de dirigir violencia contra el Capitolio, también referencias el mismo día, el 6 de enero de 2021, de gente que estaba armada y de cómo el servicio secreto y las agencias de inteligencia vieron a gente que tenía armas en todo el entorno, ¿no?, del National Mall, que es como se conoce a toda la zona donde está el Capitolio, la Casa Blanca, los museos y edificios gubernamentales federales del Distrito de Columbia.
As the documents we received make clear, the Secret Service was aware of weapons possessed by those gathered at rallies in D.C. as early as the evening before. Take this document, for instance, which details multiple arrests in the crowds demonstrating on January 5th. Those arrests were for weapons offenses, handguns, high-capacity feeding devices, ammunition. What the Secret Service saw on the 6th was entirely consistent with the violent rhetoric circulating in the days before the joint session on pro-Trump websites, at times amplified by the president's own advisors. On one of these sites, as you've heard, One of those was called the Donald.win. The Select Committee has obtained a text message that Jason Miller, a senior communications advisor, sent to Mark Meadows less than a week before January 6th. I got the base fired up, he wrote in all caps. He sent a link to this page on the Donald.win. The linked web page had comments about the joint session of Congress on January 6th. Take a look at some of those comments. Gallows don't require electricity.
LOL.
If the filthy commie maggots try to push their fraud through, there will be hell to pay.
LOL.
Our lawmakers in Congress can leave one of two ways. One, in a body bag.
Wow.
Two, after rightfully certifying Trump the winner. Mr. Miller claimed that he had no idea about the hundreds of comments like these in the link that he sent to Mark Meadows.
If I had seen something like that, I probably would have flipped it to someone at the White House. Or if I had seen something of that nature, I would have said, we got to flag this for Secret Service or something of that nature.
But the Trump administration was aware of this type of violent rhetoric prior to January 6th. In fact, as we have seen, the Secret Service and other agencies knew of the prospect of violence well in advance of the president's speech at the Ellipse. Despite this, certain White House and Secret Service witnesses previously testified that they had received no intelligence about violence that could have potentially
Sí, es verdad que también había menos de lo previsto, perdón.
Including the vice president.
Como que no había suficientes policías, agentes de la policía del Capitolio para defender el edificio.
Secret Service and other sources. The Secret Service was monitoring this kind of online activity and was sharing and receiving the results of that effort.
Celiaker, muchísimas gracias por esa sub de 20 meses.
Sharing intelligence about the joint session of Congress derived from social media and other sources. The same day Jason Miller sent his text message, agents received reports about a spike in activity on another platform called Parler. This was December 30th. In this email, an agent received a report noting a lot of violent rhetoric on Parler directed at government people and entities, including Secret Service protectees. One of these protectees was Vice President Pence, perhaps the primary target of President Trump's pressure campaign in the days leading up to January 6th. The day before the joint session, on January 5th, Secret Service was aware of increased chatter focused on Vice President Pence.
O sea, es algo generalizado, ¿no? Que existía la percepción de que se iba a producir violencia el 6 de enero. O sea, que Trump lo sabía perfectamente.
In the joint session the next day, January 6th. On the morning of the 6th, agents received alerts of online threats that Vice President Pence would be, quote, a dead man walking if he doesn't do the right thing. Another agent reported, quote, I saw several other alerts saying they will storm the Capitol if he doesn't do the right thing. The anger reflected in these postings was obvious. The man at the center of the storm on January 6th, President Trump. On the evening of January 5th, President Trump gathered a few of his communication staffers in the Oval Office. The door was open, allowing the president and others assembled there to hear the sounds of the crowd gathered at Freedom Plaza just a few blocks from the White House. President Trump could tell that his supporters were riled up. Here again is Judd Deere, a deputy White House press secretary, describing the president's reaction.
He fairly quickly moved to how fired up the crowd is, or was going to be.
What did he say about it?
Just that they were fired up, they were angry, they feel like the election had been stolen, that the election was rigged, that we went on and on about that for a little bit.
Yes. The president knew the crowd was angry because he had stoked that anger. He knew that they believed that the election had been rigged and stolen because he had told them falsely that it had been rigged and stolen. And by the time he incited that angry mob to march on the Capitol, he knew they were armed and dangerous, all the better to stop the peaceful transfer of power. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. At this point in our meeting, we'll take a brief recess.
Mira, van a parar un
Pursuant to the order of the committee of today,
pues voy a recoger la
Chair
comida.
declares the committee in recess for a period of approximately 10 minutes.
In the morning of January 6th, President Trump knew that the crowd was angry.
Vale.
He knew that they were armed and dangerous.
Voy a comer mientras escucho.
And he knew that they were going to the Capitol. It's important to understand the lengths the president was willing to go to physically be at the Capitol because it was part of his strategy to disrupt Congress and to stay in power. As the time for the Ellipse rally approached, an email was circulated among intelligence officials, including Secret Service intelligence official, attaching communications among rallygoers that specifically contemplated violence. Trump has given us marching orders. One post on the Donald.win wrote, basically, if you're east of the Mississippi, you can and should be there.
A ver, está claro que Trump a muchos niveles habla en clave, ¿no?
Full kits,
pero no hay una orden directa. O sea, la clave es, hay un vínculo directo entre... Hay un vínculo directo entre la violencia del Capitolio y que Trump dijera algo, ¿no? Específico, es, oye, sí, id, ¿no? O una conversación que ha tenido directamente con uno de los líderes extremistas. Claro, es que si no, hay una ambigüedad que a nivel legal es muy difícil de perseguir o de enjuiciar, ¿no? Entonces, aquí, vale, pueden decir que hay gente que está comentando en Donald.win que van a llevar a cabo violencia en el Capitolio y que todo viene como un poco fomentado por las mentiras de Donald Trump, pero oye, si es que gente extremista y gente gilipollas hay en todos lados, entonces a mí no me parece como... al menos desde el punto de vista legal, no me parece que sea vulnerable Trump en ese caso.
Monument would not enter the rally area because magnetometers used in screening attendees would detect any prohibited items they carried. Mr. Trump knew this. His Secret Service had told him about it that morning. Even in spite of these warnings, Cassidy Hutchinson overheard the president say this shortly before he took stage.
He wanted it full, and he was angry that we weren't letting people through the mags with weapons, what the Secret Service deems as weapons and our weapons. I was in the vicinity of a conversation where I overheard the president say something to the effect of, you know, I don't effing care that they have weapons. They're not here to hurt me. Take the effing mags
Esto ya lo sabíamos, ¿no? Que a Trump le da igual que sus seguidores tuvieran armas en la elipse, ¿no? Cuando dio su discurso del 6 de enero.
And when he went on stage, President Trump himself asked law enforcement to let his supporters in the rally site.
And I'd love to have, if those tens of thousands of people would be allowed, the military, the Secret Service, and we want to thank you, and the police, law enforcement, great, you're doing a great job. But I'd love it if they could be allowed to come up here with us. Is that possible? Can you just let them come up, please?
O sea, él sabe que están armados y sin embargo quiere dejarlos entrar.
President Trump then told his supporters to march to the Capitol. Let's pause at this point to consider President Trump's state of mind, his motivation at this moment. By that point, it was known to Secret Service that members of the crowd were armed. President Trump had been told, and there was no doubt that President Trump knew what he was going to do.
No es
sending an angry mob, a number of whom were clad in tactical gear and military garb, armed with various weapons, to the Capitol. There's no scenario where that action is benign. And there's no scenario where an American president should have engaged in that conduct. It did not matter whether President Trump believed the election had been stolen or not. This could not be justified on any basis for any reason. You may also recall testimony from our summer hearings regarding Mr. Trump's efforts to lead the mob to the Capitol himself in his angry altercation in the presidential SUV when the Secret Service told him it was far too dangerous for him to go. As we detailed in testimony from the Metropolitan Police and White House personnel, during our July 21st hearing, information about the altercation was widely known. So widely known that one former White House employee with national security responsibilities explained that this information was in fact water cooler talk in the White House complex. As that professional told us, they remember hearing in the days after January 6th how angry the president was when he was in a limo that afternoon. That professional also testified that they were specifically informed of the president's irate behavior in the SUV by Mr. Ornato in Mr. Ornato's office. It was Mr. Engel with Mr. Ornato in that office. They'd expressed to me that the president was irate, on the drive up. Mr. Engel did not deny the fact that the president was irate. That, of course, corresponds closely with the testimony you saw this summer from Cassidy Hutchinson, a Metropolitan Police officer who was in the motorcade, and from multiple sources. Additionally, after concluding its review of the voluminous additional Secret Service communications from January 5th and January 6th, the committee will be recalling witnesses and conducting further investigative depositions based on that material. Following that activity, we will provide even greater detail in our final report. And I will also note this. The committee is reviewing testimony regarding potential obstruction on this issue, including testimony about advice given not to tell the committee about this specific topic.
What?
We will address this matter in our report. We also want to remind you now of how security professionals working in the White House complex and who reported to national security officials responded when they learned that Mr. Trump intended to lead the mob to the Capitol.
To be completely honest, we were all in a state of shock.
Because why?
Because it's just, one, I think the actual physical feasibility of doing it, and then also we all knew what that indicated and what that meant, that this was no longer a rally, that this was going to move to something else if he physically walked to the Capitol. I don't know if you want to use the word insurrection, coup, whatever. We all knew that this would move from a normal, democratic, public event into something else. Why were we alarmed?
Right.
The president wanted to lead tens of thousands of people to the Capitol. I think that was enough grounds for us to be alarmed.
Un poquito, ¿no?
President Trump was still considering traveling to the Capitol even after returning to the White House. He knew well before 2 p.m. that a violent riot was underway at the Capitol. He was aware of the ongoing lawlessness, but his motorcade was held on West Executive Avenue outside the White House because he still wanted to join the crowd. Here's Kayleigh McEnany, the White House press secretary, describing an exchange she had with the president as soon as he arrived back at the White House.
So to the best of my recollection, I recall him being saying that he wanted to physically walk and be a part of the march, and then saying that he would ride the beast if he needed to, ride in the presidential limo.
From the Secret Service, the Select Committee has also obtained important new evidence on this issue. It shows how frantic this hour must have been for the Secret Service, scrambling to get the President of the United States to back down from a dangerous and reckless decision that put people in harm's way. Take a look at the Secret Service email from 1:19 p.m. on January 6th, the minute that President Trump got out of the presidential vehicle back at the White House. As soon as the president left his motorcade, leadership from the Secret Service contacted Bobby Engel, the lead agent for the presidential detail, and warned him that they were, quote, concerned about an OTR, an off-the-record movement, to the Capitol. The people sworn to protect the safety of the President of the United States and who routinely put themselves in harm's way were convinced that this was a bad idea. Secret Service documents also reveal how agents were poised to take President Trump to the Capitol later that afternoon. Agents were instructed to don their protective gear and prepare for a movement. A few minutes later, they were told the president would leave for the Capitol in 2 hours. It wasn't until 1:55 p.m. that the president's lead Secret Service agent told them to stand down. We are not doing an OTR to the Capitol. By then, rioters had breached the Capitol and were violently attacking the efforts of the brave men and women in law enforcement trying to resist the mob. President Trump may not have gone to the Capitol on January 6th, but what he did from the White House cannot be justified. While congressional leaders, both Democrats and Republicans, worked with Vice President Pence to try and address the violence, President Trump refused urgent pleas for help from nearly everyone around him. And what he did do only made the situation worse. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Raskin, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The president was still exhorting his supporters at the Ellipse to go fight like hell at 12:50, around the time that the first wave of rioters first breached barricades defending the Capitol. Secret Service documents we recently received give a timeline of precisely what the White House knew and when. At 1:19, the President's Emergency Operations Center sent an email to Secret Service, national security, and military advisors to the President and Vice President, informing them that, quote, hundreds of Trump supporters stormed through metal barricades at the back of the Capitol building about 1 p.m. Wednesday, running past security guards and breaking fences. When the president returned to the White House around 1:20, he entered the Oval Office and was told right then about the onset of violence at the Capitol. From that point until approximately 4 p.m., over the next 2 hours and 40 minutes, the president stayed in the White House dining room, attached to the Oval Office, and watched this unprecedented assault take place at the Capitol. We have testimony from several members of the president's White House staff establishing that President Trump refused entreaties from his closest advisors and family members to tell his supporters to stand down and leave the Capitol. Here's the testimony of President Trump's White House counsel, Pat Cipollone.
I can't talk about conversations with the president, but I can generically say that I said, you know, people need to be told, there needs to be a public announcement fast that they need to leave the Capitol.
And Pat, could you let us know approximately when you said that?
Approximately when? Almost immediately after I found out people were getting into the Capitol or approaching the Capitol in a way that was violent.
You on the staff did not want people to leave the Capitol.
On the staff?
In the White House.
I can't think of anybody, you know, on that day who didn't want people to get out of the Capitol once, particularly once the violence started. No, I mean.
What about the president?
Yeah.
Well, she said the staff, so I answered.
No, I said in the White House.
Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize. I thought you said who else on the staff. I can't reveal communications, but obviously I think, you know,
Mr. Cipollone's testimony is corroborated by multiple other White House staff members, including Cassidy Hutchinson. Here's Ms. Hutchinson describing what she heard from Mark Meadows.
¡Vaya vídeo!
He had said something to the effect of, you heard him, Pat. He doesn't want to do anything more. He doesn't think they're doing anything wrong.
A former White House employee with national security duties similarly recalled an exchange between Mr. Cipollone and Eric Hirschman about President Trump's inaction against the mob assault underway at the Capitol. Mr. Hirschman said something to Mr. Cipollone. He seemed to relay that, the president didn't want anything done. Throughout this period, some of the president's most important political allies, family members, and senior staff all begged him to tell his supporters to disperse and go home. They included...
A ver, os lo explico. Paz Cipollone, que era uno de los abogados más importantes dentro de la Casa Blanca, le están preguntando, le pregunta, ¿cómo se llama? Liz Cheney, ¿vale? Uno de los miembros del comité que investiga el asalto al Capitolio, si cree que alguien dentro de la Casa Blanca no quería que los asaltantes del Capitolio se fueran del Capitolio. Entonces dice, en la Casa Blanca, no creo que hubiera nadie del equipo que no quisiera que la gente se fuera del Capitolio, estaban siendo violentos, ¿no? Entonces dice, pero ¿y el presidente? Y entonces el otro se queda como... Dice, no, me habíais preguntado sobre los empleados de la Casa Blanca. No, te he preguntado dentro de la Casa Blanca. Y hace... habla con su abogado, que está justo a su lado, y el abogado dice... Y él dice, no creo que pueda desvelar conversaciones. ¿Se queda callado? Entonces... Como dejando caer clarísimamente que Trump quería que los que estaban siendo violentos siguieran dentro del Capitolio, mostrándose violentos porque estaban defendiendo, pues, que se revirtieran los resultados tal y como él quería.
When you talked to him on January 6th? It's my understanding he was watching television.
When you were in the dining room in these discussions, was the violence at the Capitol visible on the screen on the television?
Yes.
As the president watched the bloody attack unfold on Fox News from his dining room, members of Congress and other government officials stepped into the gigantic leadership void created by the president's chilling and studied passivity that day. What you're about to see is previously unseen footage of congressional leaders, both Republicans and Democrats, as they were taken to a secure location during the riot. You'll see how everyone involved was working actively to stop the violence, to get federal law enforcement deployed to the scene, to put down the violence and secure the Capitol complex. Not just Democrats like Speaker Nancy Pelosi and House Majority Leader Steny Hoyer, but Republicans like Vice President Pence, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, Majority Whip John Thune, and countless other appointees across the administration. All of them did what President Trump was not doing, what he simply refused to do. Take a listen.
We're starting to get surrounded. They're taking the north front scaffolding. Let's look at more munitions. We're not going to be able to hold.
The door has been breached and people are gaining access into the Capitol.
Yeah, but you know what? We have got to finish the proceedings, or else it will have a complete victory.
Senator Schumer is at a secure location, and they're locked down in the Senate.
There has to be some way we can maintain the sense that people have that there's some security or some confidence.
Qué buena cámara estaba ahí dentro, ¿no? Grabando todo esto.
And that we can elect the President of the United States. Did we go back into session?
We did go back into session, but now apparently everybody on the floor is putting on tear gas masks to prepare for a breach. Well, I'm trying to get more information.
They're putting on their
tear gas masks.
I can't. We need an area for the House members. They're all walking over
no sé, o sea, se supone que están en una localización no especificada porque ya los están protegiendo. Estaba Jim Clyburn, que es el tercer demócrata más importante de la Cámara de Representantes. Bueno, sí, de la Cámara.
We have some senators who are still in their hideaways. They need massive personnel now. Can you get the Maryland National Guard to come too?
I have something to say, Mr. Secretary. I'm going to call the mayor of Washington, D.C. right now and see what other outreach she has to other police departments, as Senate Leader Hoyer has mentioned.
No entiendo por qué hace una cámara ahí. ¿Qué hace una cámara siguiéndolos? ¿Sabes? Porque no puede ser un periodista que les ha seguido hasta...
Governor, I don't know if you have been approached about Virginia National Guard. Mr. Hoyer was speaking to Governor Hogan.
A ver,
but
ya sabéis que soy la última persona conspiranoica del mundo, ¿eh? Pero pasa que, no sé, o sea, no entiendo qué pinta una cámara ahí. A ver si alguien lo está contando en Twitter.
Thank you. Oh my gosh.
No, no es un móvil. Eso, ya te digo, ni de coña es un móvil. Y mira qué cerca se está poniendo, ¿no?
Okay, thank you, Governor. I appreciate what you're doing, and if you don't mind, I'd like to stay in touch. Thank you.
Sí, se darían cuenta desde el segundo uno de que podría sacar rédito de todo esto. A ver.
I'm just talking to Governor Northam.
No necesariamente para sacar rédito, que también puede ser, eso, ojo, los demócratas son muy listos y Nancy Pelosi la que más, pero también es, ¿sabes?, una forma de decir, vamos a coger pruebas porque esto que está pasando, esto sí que está grabado con un móvil.
Obviously ransacking our offices and all the rest of
esto
that.
sí.
That's nothing.
Sí, que dejen constancia, me cuadra. Lo que pasa es que simplemente me ha sorprendido la calidad de la imagen. Si alguien está pendiente de Twitter y ve alguna referencia, me gustaría saberlo.
Much of it at the instigation of the President of the United States. And now, if he could at least somebody.
Yeah, why don't you get the president to tell them to leave the Capitol, Mr. Attorney General, in your law enforcement responsibility? A public statement, they should all leave. This cannot be just we're waiting for so-and-so. We need them there now, whoever you got.
You also have troops. This is Steny Hoyer. Troops,
Okay, so we have a little bit of time to make that decision.
Andrews Air Force Base.
All right.
Other military bases.
Thank you.
We
Thanks,
need
Paul.
active
Bye.
duty National Guard.
How soon in the future can you have the place evacuated, pulled, cleaned out?
I don't want to speak for the leadership that's going to be responsible for executing the operation, so I'm not going to say that because they're on the ground and they're the
Well, just pretend for a moment it was the Pentagon or the White House or some other entity that was under siege. And let me say, you can logistically get people there as you make the plan.
Anda, un momento, han salido dos noticias bastante importantes ahora. Bueno, luego las comentamos cuando termine esto.
We're trying to figure out how we can get this job done today. We talked to Mitch about it earlier. He's not in the room right now, but he was with us earlier and said, we want to expedite this, and hopefully they could confine it to just one complaint, Arizona, and then we could vote, and that would be, then just move forward with the rest of the state. The overriding wish is to do it at the Capitol. What we are being told very directly is it's going to take days for the Capitol to be okay again. We've gotten a very bad report about the condition of the House floor with defecation and all that kind of thing as well. I don't think that that's hard to clean up.
Veo que nadie está diciendo nada sobre lo de la cámara. Está todo el mundo diciendo que las imágenes son increíbles.
I just got off with the Vice President.
I got off with the Vice President-elect. So I'll tell him.
Okay. But
esto no es móvil. Yo diría que no es móvil, ¿eh? Bueno, igual está grabado en modo cinemático con el iPhone 14 o el, bueno, perdón, no, por entonces era 2021. El 12, no, el 12 Pro no tiene. ¿Cuándo salió el iPhone 13? El año pasado. No puede ser en modo cinemático tampoco, tienes una cámara buena. Esto sí que es móvil.
Of the U.S. Capitol Police. He just informed me what you will hear through official channels. Paul Irving, your sergeant at arms, will inform you that their best information is that they believe that the House and the Senate will be able to reconvene in roughly an hour.
Good news.
Sergeant at arms be in touch about the process for getting members back into the building.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President. Good news.
In this video, you just saw Senator Chuck Schumer urging Acting Attorney General Jeff Rosen to get President Trump to call off the rioters. Of course, Acting AG Rosen did take action to defend the government, as did many other officials.
Yo creo que no es móvil, al menos algunas de las imágenes. Está demasiado difuminado el fondo.
Trump was the only person who could get the mob to end its violent siege of the Congress, leave the Capitol, and go home. Here's Senator McConnell speaking after January 6th about how President Trump abandoned his duties and failed to do his job.
It was obvious.
Sí, Waldo, lo que dice Waldo me cuadra, ¿no? Que hay algún tipo de servicio audiovisual dentro del Congreso y alguien con calma y perspectiva histórica debió darse cuenta de que había que dejar constancia de lo que sucedía. Sí, pero me gustaría que lo explicaran, la verdad. Me parece como una parte de la noticia importante e interesante.
The president did not act swiftly. He did not do his job. He didn't take steps so federal law could be faithfully executed and order restored. No.
In the midst of this violent chaos, Kevin McCarthy implored Donald Trump to tell his supporters in the mob to leave the Capitol. And when that didn't work, McCarthy called Trump's adult children to try to get them to intercede with Trump to call off the insurrectionary violence. In our prior hearings, we showed you a description of what McCarthy told Republican Congresswoman Jamie Herrera Butler about his conversation with Trump during the violence. Another witness, Mick Mulvaney, President Trump's former chief of staff, has also come forward and corroborated her shocking account.
You know, I asked Kevin McCarthy, who's the Republican leader, about this. And he said he called Donald Trump. He finally got through to Donald Trump, and he said, "You have got to get on TV. You've got to get on Twitter. You've got to call these people off." You know what the president said to him? This is as it's happening. He said, "Well, Kevin, these aren't my people. You know, these are Antifa." And Kevin responded and said, "No, they're your people. They literally just came through my office windows, and my staff are running for cover. I mean, they're running for their lives. You need to call them off." And the president's response to Kevin, to me, was chilling. He said, "Well, Kevin, I guess they're just more upset about the election, theft than you are." And that's, you've seen widespread reports of Kevin McCarthy and the president having basically a swearing conversation. That's when the swearing commenced, because the president was basically saying, "Nah, I'm okay with this."
I had a conversation at some point in the day or week after the riot with Kevin.
Lo he preguntado en...
Yeah, it was very similar to what Jamie had, the conversation she had retold.
Lo he preguntado en Twitter a ver si alguien me responde.
The president told him something along the lines of, "Kevin, maybe these people are just more angry about this than you are, maybe more upset." I had the conversation similar to that with Kevin in the day to week after the riot.
And we know how Kevin McCarthy described President Trump's conduct, both in public and in private.
The president bears responsibility for Wednesday's attack on Congress by mob rioters. He should have immediately denounced the mob when he saw what was unfolding. These facts require immediate action by President Trump. Accept his share of responsibility, quell the brewing unrest, and ensure President-elect Biden is able to successfully begin his term.
But let me be very clear to all of you, and I've been very clear to the president. He bears responsibilities for his words and actions. No ifs, ands, or buts. I asked him personally today, does he hold responsibility for what happened? Does he feel bad about what happened?
Bueno, aquí está simplemente enseñando declaraciones de aliados republicanos de Trump que fueron críticos con él al principio y ahora ya no, ¿no?
Violence. This deliberate decision to further enrage the mob against Vice President Pence cannot be justified by anything that President Trump might have thought about the election. The tweet came precisely at the time Pence's Secret Service detail was most seriously concerned for the Vice President's physical safety. We've obtained new documents from the Secret Service, real-time chats that underscore the threat they knew the Vice President would be facing because of the President's escalating incitement of the mob. After Trump's tweet, one agent in the Secret Service's intelligence division immediately warned, POTUS just tweeted about Pence. Probably not going to be good.
Ojo, que quedan solo 15 minutos para el fin de la audiencia y me temo que Raskin va a enseñar alguna cosilla interesante.
Anti-Pence tweet on his followers. POTUS said he lacked courage. Over 24,000 likes in under 2 minutes. Employees at Twitter were nervously monitoring the situation. They knew that certain Twitter users were rioting at the Capitol and tweeting about it at the same time. As the afternoon progressed, the company detected a surge in violent hashtags on the platform, including lines of lethal incitement like, execute Mike Pence. Listen to this former Twitter employee, Anika Navarroli, who first came to the committee anonymously, but has now bravely agreed to be named because she wants to speak out about the magnitude of the threats facing our people.
And you were also seeing content on the platform at that time that was threatening towards the vice president. Hashtag execute Mike Pence.
They were literally calling for his execution.
As this tweet was going out.
Yes. And in response to this tweet too, because I think as many of Donald Trump's tweets did, it again fanned the flames, and it was individuals who were already constructing gallows, who were already willing and able and wanting to execute someone and looking for someone to be killed. Now the individual who has called upon them to begin this coup is now pointing the finger at another individual while they're ready to do this.
Here's a small sample of the reactions that President Trump's fan the flames tweet provoked among Capitol rioters in real time.
What percentage of the crowd is going to the Capitol?
100%. It is spread like wildfire that Pence has betrayed us and everybody's marching on the Capitol, all 1 million of us. It's insane.
Claro, tuiteó un ataque contra Mike Pence diciendo que no iba a estar a la altura del momento para revertir los resultados de las elecciones, y ahí, pues ya veis, como wildfire, ¿no? Como fuego valirio, todos están reaccionando al tweet. Mirad, Trump ha tuiteado esto.
Between 2:30 and 2:35, within 10 minutes of President Trump's tweet, thousands of rioters overran the line that the Metropolitan Police Force's Civil Disturbance Unit was holding on the west side of the Capitol. This was the first time in the history of the Metropolitan Police Department that a security line like that had ever been broken. President Trump's conduct that day was so shameful and so outrageous that it prompted numerous members of the White House staff and other Trump appointees to resign. In prior hearings, you've heard Deputy National Security Advisor Matt Pottinger and Deputy White House Press Secretary Sarah Matthews explain why they felt compelled to resign on that day. Since then, we've spoken to more high-ranking officials, like President Trump's envoy to Northern Ireland and former Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney, and Transportation Secretary Elaine Chao, who resigned after the 6th in protest of Trump's misconduct and to dissociate themselves from his role in the violence. Take a listen to what they had to say.
Elaine Chao es la mujer de Mitch McConnell, el líder de los republicanos en el Senado.
Was stunned by the president's apparent indifference to the violence. Now is the time for the president to be presidential. I thought he failed at doing it. I thought he failed at a critical time to be the sort of leader that the nation needed.
I think the events at the Capitol, however they occurred, were shocking.
La familia de Elaine Chao está forradísima. Participé cuando estaba trabajando en una productora. Estaban haciendo como una exposición sobre la familia de Elaine Chao, que eran inmigrantes chinos, y hicieron, creo que era tema de transporte marítimo, o sea, hiperforrados. Sí, puede que ella llegara como siendo muy pequeña.
Power, I believe in democracy. And so it was a decision that I made on my own.
When security assistance began to arrive at the Capitol and the tide turned against the insurrection, President Trump finally gave his painfully belated instruction at 4:17 p.m. So after multiple hours of rioting and more than 100 serious injuries suffered by our law enforcement officers, the crowd finally began to disperse. Listen carefully to what they said as they decided to leave the Capitol.
A ver cuánta pasta tiene. Vamos, me suena que eran rarísimos. 30 millones de patrimonio. ¿Y su padre? Que todavía vive, tiene 94 tacos, tú. 400 millones de dólares de patrimonio a su padre. O sea, el cuñado de Mitch McConnell. Sí, se supone que acaba en 10 minutos el comité.
Significantly, he made it clear that he considered the violence perfectly foreseeable and predictable. Check it out. These are the things and events that happen when a sacred landslide election victory is so unceremoniously, viciously stripped away from great patriots who have been badly, unfairly treated for so long.
Que tuiteara esto. Es una puta locura que tuiteara esto, tío.
Trump was telling us that the vice president, the Congress, and all the injured and wounded cops, some of whom are with us today, got what was coming to us. According to Trump, January 6th should not be a day that lives in shame and infamy in our history, but rather in glory. Remember this day forever, he wrote proudly, as if he were talking about D-Day or the Battle of Yorktown. Trump did nothing to stop the deadly violence for obvious reasons. He thought it was all justified, he incited it, and he supported it.
Would it have been possible at any moment for the president to walk down to the podium in the briefing room and talk to the nation at any time between when you first gave him that advice at 2 o'clock and 4:17 when the video statement?
Porque es trending topic worldwide.
Would that have been possible?
Would it have been possible?
Yes.
Yes, would have been possible.
The president had wanted to make a statement and address the American people. He could have been on camera almost instantly. And conversely, the White House press corps has offices that are located directly behind the briefing room. And so if he had wanted to make an address from the Oval Office, we could have assembled the White House press corps probably in a matter of minutes to get them into the Oval for him to do an on-camera address.
Mr. Chairman, nothing in law or fact could justify the president's failure to act.
And I assume you also would agree the president has a particular obligation to take care that the laws be faithfully executed.
That is one of the president's obligations, correct.
Mr. Chairman, in numerous places, our Constitution strongly opposes insurrection and rebellion. Article 1 gives Congress the power to call forth the militia to suppress insurrections. Section 3 of the 14th Amendment disqualified from holding federal and state office anyone who has sworn an oath to defend the Constitution but betrays it by engaging in insurrection or rebellion. It was President Lincoln at the start of the Civil War in 1861 who best explained why democracy rejects insurrection. Insurrection, he said, is a war upon the first principle of popular government, the rights of the people. American democracy belongs to all the American people, not to a single man. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Pues ahí está todo.
The gentleman yields
Estoy leyendo
back.
Twitter a ver si veo algo interesante.
During this committee's first hearing in July of last year, our witnesses were 4 police officers who helped repel the riots of January 6th. We asked them what they hoped to see the committee accomplish over the course of our investigation. Officer Gunnell wanted to know why the rioters were made to believe that the election process was rigged. Officer Fanone asked us to look into the actions and activities that resulted in the day's events. Officer Hodges was concerned about whether anyone in power had a role. Officer Dunn put it simply, get to the bottom of what happened. We've worked for more than a year to get those answers. We've conducted more than 1,000 interviews and depositions. We received and reviewed hundreds of thousands of pages of documents. Thanks to the tireless work of our members and investigators, we have left no doubt, none, that Donald Trump led an effort to upend American democracy that directly resulted in the violence of January 6th. He tried to take away the voice of the American people in choosing their president and replace the will of the voters with his will to remain in power. He is the one person at the center of the story of what happened on January 6th. So we want to hear from him. The committee needs to do everything in our power to tell the most complete story possible and provide recommendations to help ensure nothing like January 6th ever happens again. We need to be fair and thorough and gain a full context for the evidence we've obtained. But the need for this committee to hear from Donald Trump goes beyond our fact-finding. This is a question about accountability to the American people.
Oh, lo van a citar, ¿eh?
He must be accountable.
Huh.
He is required to answer for his actions. He's required to answer to those police officers who put their lives and bodies on the line to defend our democracy. He's required to answer to those millions of Americans whose votes he wanted to throw out as part of his scheme to remain in power. And whatever is underway to ensure this accountability under law, this committee will demand a full accounting to every American person of the events of January 6th. So it is our obligation to seek Donald Trump's testimony. There's precedent in American history for Congress to compel the testimony of a president. There's also precedent for presidents to provide testimony and documentary evidence to congressional investigators. We also recognize that a subpoena to a former president is a serious and extraordinary action. That's why we want to take this step in full view of the American people, especially because the subject matter at issue is so important to the American people and the stakes are so high for our future and our democracy. And so I recognize the Vice Chair, Ms. Cheney of Wyoming, to offer a motion.
Mr. Chairman, pursuant to today's notice, I send to the desk a committee resolution and ask for its immediate consideration.
The clerk will report the resolution.
Committee Resolution 1, resolved that the chairman be and is hereby directed to subpoena Donald J. Trump for documents and testimony in connection with the January 6th attack on the United States Capitol pursuant to Section 5C4 of House Resolution 503 and Clause 2M of Rule 11 of the Rules of the House of Representatives.
The gentlewoman from Wyoming is recognized on her resolution.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, our committee now has sufficient information to answer many of the critical questions posed by Congress at the outset. We have sufficient information to consider criminal referrals for multiple individuals and to recommend a range of legislative proposals to guard against another January 6th. But a key task remains. We must seek the testimony under oath of January 6th central player. More than 30 witnesses in our investigation have invoked their Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. And several of those did so specifically in response to questions about their dealings with Donald Trump directly. Wow. Here are a few examples. This is Roger Stone with Oath Keepers at the Willard Hotel on the morning of January 6th. And here is Mr. Stone testifying before our committee. Did you speak to President Trump on his private cell phone on either January 5th or January 6th?
Once again, on advice of counsel, I will assert my Fifth Amendment right to respectfully decline to answer your question.
This is General Michael Flynn walking with Oath Keepers on December 12th, 2020. And here is General Flynn's testimony before our committee.
Did you, General Flynn, talk to President Trump at any point on January 6, 2021?
The fifth.
Bueno,
Here is
Flynn
John
creo que
Eastman,
se acogió a la quinta enmienda todo el rato, ¿no?
thousands of angry protesters that the vice president could change the election outcome on January 6th. Later on this same day, Dr. Eastman acknowledged in writing that Donald Trump knew what he was attempting was illegal. Here is John Eastman testifying before our committee.
Did President Trump authorize you to discuss publicly your January 4th, 2021 conversation with him?
Fifth.
So is it your position that you can discuss in the media direct conversations you had with the President of the United States, but you will not discuss those same conversations with this committee?
Fifth.
Here is Jeff Clark, who conspired with Donald Trump to corrupt the Department of Justice.
Este era uno de los
President
fiscales.
Trump wanted to appoint Jeff Clark as acting Attorney General. And as you can see in this call log we obtained from the National Archives, he did so. And here is Mr. Clark testifying before our committee.
Mr. Clark, when did you first talk directly with President Trump?
Fifth.
Mr. Clark, did you discuss with President Trump allegations of fraud in the 2020 election?
Fifth.
Other witnesses have also gone to enormous lengths to avoid testifying about their dealings with Donald Trump. Steve Bannon has been tried and convicted by a jury of his peers for contempt of Congress. He is scheduled to be sentenced for this crime later this month.
Como el vídeo ese
Criminal
de
proceedings regarding Peter Navarro
Bad Bunny,
continue.
el meme del
And Mark
niño bailando
Meadows,
así en la discoteca.
Donald Trump's former chief
Fifth.
of staff, has refused to testify
Fifth.
based upon executive privilege.
Fifth.
The committee's litigation with him
Fifth.
continues. Mr. Chairman, at some point, the Department of Justice may well unearth the facts that these and other witnesses are currently concealing. But our duty today is to our country and our children and our Constitution. We are obligated to seek answers directly from the man who set this all in motion. And every American is entitled to those answers, so we can act now to protect our republic. So this afternoon, I am offering this resolution that the committee direct the chairman to issue a subpoena for relevant documents and testimony under oath from Donald John Trump in connection with the January 6th attack on the United States Capitol. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield
Bueno,
back.
pues citan a Trump.
Young lady
Esto,
yields back. If there's no
Trump se va a
further
negar,
debate, the
va a haber
question
apelaciones, se va a
is
ir a los
on
juzgados.
agreeing to the resolution. Those in favor will say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed is no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
Mr. Chairman, I request a recorded vote.
A recorded vote is requested. The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Cheney.
Aye.
Ms. Cheney, aye. Ms. Lofgren.
Aye.
Ms. Lofgren, aye. Mr. Schiff.
Aye.
Mr. Schiff, aye. Mr. Aguilar.
Qué postureo esto de hacer esto.
Mr. Aguilar, aye. Mrs. Murphy.
Aye.
Mrs. Murphy, aye. Mr. Raskin.
Aye.
Mr. Raskin, aye. Mrs. Luria.
Aye.
Luria tiene unas
Luria,
elecciones muy difíciles en noviembre.
Mr. Kinzinger?
En el distrito 2 de Virginia.
Mr.
Y Virginia
Kinzinger,
Beach.
aye. Mr. Chairman.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, aye.
The clerk will report the vote.
Mr. Chairman, on this vote, there are 9 ayes and 0 noes.
The resolution is agreed to. Without objection, a motion to reconsider is laid on the table. The chair requests that those in the hearing room remain seated until the Capitol Police have escorted members from the room. Without objection, the committee stands adjourned.
Tremendo. Tremendo, tremendo, tremendo. Bueno, pues nada, ahora entiendo que se tiene que votar en la Cámara de Representantes. Los demócratas tienen mayoría, así que cabe pensar que sí. Va a haber republicanos que van a votar a favor, incluidos propio Kinzinger y Liz Cheney. Luego también hay algunos republicanos que de hecho han perdido primarias. Me suena así Jamie Herrera Butler, por ejemplo, del estado de Washington, que ya votó a favor del impeachment. Entiendo que también votará a favor de que le hagan preguntas a Trump. Además perdió sus primarias, o sea que ya no se juega nada. hay varios congresistas de ese tipo que también votarán a favor. Así que estaremos pendientes de eso. Yo diría que falta una votación en la Cámara de Representantes para que se decida en ese asunto. Por lo demás, a otras noticias que han salido, en el tema de la investigación de los... Os lo voy a decir, déjame un momento que lo piense. De los documentos que se recuperaron del Mar-a-Lago, la residencia de Trump en Florida, sabemos que el Tribunal Supremo se ha negado a considerar una petición de Trump para que el Departamento de Justicia y sobre todo el FBI no siguiera como indagando en los documentos marcados como confidenciales, que es algo que habían pedido, pues no sé si porque no quieren que... No se sabe muy bien por qué. El caso es que Trump quiere recuperar esos materiales que incautó el FBI.
2 años, Eso quiere decir que realmente merece la pena estar aquí, Nanisimo Maricopa.
Oh, cute. Muchas gracias, Benito Arroyo 11. Gracias por esos 2 añazos de nivel 1. Enhorabuena, por cierto. Ahí estamos con ese huevito que acabas de desbloquear. Lo dicho, que Trump lo que quiere es recuperar esos materiales, ¿no?, que le incautó el FBI. Entre ellos, recordemos que había materiales confidenciales, materiales, o sea, como top secret, que necesitas el mayor nivel de... ¿cómo se dice? De autorización para poder verlos. Y el caso es que los quiere recuperar. No sabemos muy bien por qué, ¿no? Además, lo que quería es impedir que el Departamento de Justicia siga indagando en esos documentos porque están intentando determinar cuál es la gravedad del hecho de que estuvieran a disposición de Trump en Mar-a-Lago, que es una localización no asegurada. Entonces, el Tribunal Supremo... Bueno, Trump había pedido una apelación, ¿no?, para que tomaran una decisión distinta a lo que habían decidido tribunales inferiores, y el Tribunal Supremo ha dicho que pasan de tener que lidiar con esto. De hecho, no parece que ninguno de los jueces del Tribunal Supremo haya estado ni siquiera dispuesto a escuchar las argumentaciones de la administración de Trump, lo cual me parece una buena noticia. Pero en cualquier caso, estamos todavía a la espera de que el caso avance en Florida, en este caso, ¿no? Una jueza federal en Florida, elegida por Trump, puesta ahí por Trump, pero que tendrá que tomar una decisión definitiva acerca de qué pasa realmente con esos documentos. No, ni siquiera Clarence Thomas, imagínate. O sea, ni un dissent. Luego me he abierto los vídeos, pero creo que más o menos eso es todo lo que os tengo que contar. A ver... Vale, le han dicho a Southpaw... Mira, esto todo porque lo he preguntado yo, claro. Al final, si es que Emilio aquí creando actualidad, tío. Es que no me merecéis. No me merecéis. No me merecéis. ¿Dónde está? Aquí. Yo a Southpaw le he preguntado antes, le he dicho, ¿por qué alguien estaba rodando esto? Es una buena cámara y definitivamente no es un periodista. Y entonces le han dicho que ha sido la hija de Nancy Pelosi que ha grabado ese vídeo. Un servicio público profundo. She's always been a great documentarian. Ah, vale, que es documentalista, la hija de... A ver un momento, ¿quién es? ¿Qué ojo tengo, Madre mía, sé que no me merecéis. No me merecéis. Periodista y documentalista. Sí, tío. De verdad.